It started as an ordinary morning in the quiet suburban streets of Willow Creek, but everything changed the moment I noticed my Harley was gone. I never imagined that one reckless decision by Karen's son, ripping through the neighborhood on my bike, would spiral into chaos. A crash, sirens, and whispers of tragedy spread faster than fire, and just when I thought the nightmare was over, Karen herself stepped in, pointing fingers, demanding justice from me. Who would have thought a stolen bike could ignite a feud that would shake the entire HOA to its core? The question now, am I really the one to blame? I never thought a quiet suburban street could turn into a battlefield. One morning, I woke to find my property violated in the most shocking way, and my peace shattered instantly. Neighbors whispered, cameras rolled, and suddenly, I was at the center of an escalating feud I didn't ask for. Every step I took seemed to provoke more outrage, more petty rules, more fines, until the person I trusted most became my fiercest adversary. And then it happened. A move so reckless, so dramatic, it changed everything. The question is, how far would someone go to control a street they don't even own? The sun rose over Willow Creek, casting a soft golden glow across the quiet suburban streets. Rows of perfectly trimmed lawns glistened with dew, and the faint hum of sprinklers was the only sound breaking the morning calm. In one modest house at the corner, I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood come to life. This was home, my sanctuary. A place where weekends were spent tinkering with my Harley in the garage, evenings with family laughter spilling into the backyard, and nights under a sky filled with stars, uninterrupted. Life here had a rhythm, predictable and comforting, and I liked it that way. I had always been proud of my little corner of the community. Neighbors waved as they passed by. Children played safely on the sidewalks, and the HOA signs that peppered the neighborhood felt more like gentle reminders than strict rules. I thought I knew every face, every car, every dog that roamed these streets. Yet, even in the quietest places, tensions lingered just beneath the surface. Unspoken rivalries, grudges passed down through whispered gossip, and the occasional clash over lawn height or mailbox style. I never imagined that these tiny ripples could grow into a wave strong enough to crash through my life. At first, everything seemed normal. My Harley gleamed under the garage light, a faithful companion I'd spent years restoring. Family photos lined the walls, each one a testament to shared memories and small victories. Weekends were simple. Coffee in the morning, errands in the afternoon, and bike rides through winding country roads when the weather allowed. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, though there was always one house that stood out. Karen's. The Whitmores had lived here for years, and Karen herself carried an air of authority that often felt like more than casual, neighborly concern. She watched the street like a hawk, noting every detail, questioning every choice, and enforcing her own unspoken standards with a quiet insistence that made others hesitant. It wasn't anything I did, at least not at first. Small things. Kids playing slightly too loudly, a bush growing a little too tall, my flagpole casting a shadow over the neighbor's lawn were all observed with a calculating eye. Karen seemed to thrive on these minor infractions, turning them into opportunities for control. The community's rules were strict on paper, but she treated them like weapons, ready to strike at anyone who dared stray. And while I had seen her assert herself before, I never thought her influence would extend beyond subtle warnings or snide remarks. Then there were the stories, whispered as I ran errands or biked down the streets. Neighbors fined for imaginary violations. Families dragged into tense HOA meetings, casual arguments escalating into full-blown confrontations. I listened politely, never imagining that I'd be next. But beneath the polite facade of trimmed hedges and manicured lawns, a quiet storm was brewing. Something about my presence, my independence, my unshakable routines seemed to irritate Karen in ways I couldn't yet understand. And although I tried to ignore it, I could feel the tension building in small ways. A lingering glare from her front window, a letter slipped under my door with an official seal, a casual question that hinted at judgment more than curiosity. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first, but little by little, the unease grew. The community I had loved for its peace and predictability began to feel like a stage, with me unwittingly cast as the antagonist in someone else's story. I didn't know it yet, but the calm mornings and easy weekends were about to vanish. What seemed like ordinary neighborly vigilance would soon erupt into an intense, dangerous dispute over property, authority, and pride. And the first domino to fall, one reckless act, one stolen bike, one accident would set the entire neighborhood on fire, exposing tensions that had been simmering just below the surface for years. The first warning letter arrived on a Tuesday. Its envelope was crisp, official-looking, with the HOA's logo stamped at the top, but the words inside hit like a sledgehammer. Violation of community standards, it said. My flagpole was too tall. My mailbox was slightly crooked. My driveway had a single, barely noticeable crack. Each line read like a meticulously crafted list of offenses designed to provoke guilt, yet none of them felt fair. I stared at the paper, disbelief mingling with a deep sense of frustration. After years of quietly following the rules, I suddenly felt like a criminal in my own home. At first, I tried to reason with him. I emailed, politely explaining that my mailbox was functional and my flagpole had stood for years without complaint. I even offered to fix the driveway crack immediately, just to demonstrate my willingness to cooperate. The response, if it could be called that, was chilling in its bureaucratic coldness. Another letter arrived, this time with fines attached. $250 for the mailbox, $500 for the flagpole, and another $150 for the driveway. The total $900 was suddenly due in less than 2 weeks. There was no room for negotiation, no acknowledgement that these were minor or unintentional infractions. It wasn't just the letters. Karen, always lurking behind the polite facade, began to escalate. She watched my house more closely than ever, timing my departures and arrivals, noting when I trimmed the hedges or parked my truck slightly off the line. She appeared at neighborhood meetings, clipboard in hand, her gaze sharp and calculating, often pointing to me subtly as she discussed community compliance. Subtlety was the worst part. Everyone else in the HOA seemed to sense the tension, but remained silent, unwilling or afraid to challenge her. It felt like a psychological siege, a slow, creeping invasion of my privacy and sanity. Then came the signs. One morning, I woke to find a small placard on my lawn. It read, "Violation, property not in full compliance." A neighbor had tipped the HOA off, and Karen, no doubt, my anger flared. Who had the right to turn my front yard into a stage for their petty power plays? I ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it in the trash, but the damage had been done. It was no longer just about fines or letters. It was a public display of control, a way to make me feel isolated, judged, and small. The following week, another incident escalated the tension further. I was working in the garage, tuning the Harley, when I heard her voice outside. Karen was speaking with another neighbor, loud enough for me to catch snippets. "He doesn't follow the rules," she said, her tone sharp and righteous. "Someone needs to make him understand his place." My stomach sank. It wasn't the rules she cared about. It was power, domination. She wanted to assert control, and I was her target. I tried to ignore it, but I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I had lived here peacefully for years. Now it felt like my life was under siege. Every move scrutinized, every small misstep punished. Then came the uninvited inspections. On consecutive mornings, HOA representatives, or perhaps volunteers answering to Karen, appeared at my property. They measured the height of my hedges, inspected my driveway, counted the number of flags on my porch. Each time they left without a word, leaving me standing in the driveway, helpless and furious. One afternoon I tried to confront them politely. "Can I help you?" I asked. They didn't respond, merely scribbling notes on clipboards before vanishing. It was as if their goal was to provoke anxiety, to remind me constantly that my home was no longer entirely mine. Despite the harassment, I tried to maintain normalcy. I rode my Harley through the neighborhood, not out of rebellion, but for the simple joy of escape. Yet even this became a flashpoint. Karen's son, a young man with a sense of entitlement he clearly inherited from his mother, began showing up on the street whenever I took the bike out. He would block my driveway, rev his own engine, or watch with an expression that blended amusement with challenge. It was clear he was testing boundaries, daring me to respond. I kept my cool, but the tension was palpable. Neighbors began watching, whispering, and taking sides. Fines escalated quickly. Each minor violation now carried a steeper cost, and the letters piled up. My mailbox, my flagpole, even the way I parked my truck in the garage, it all became grounds for official complaint. I spent hours documenting every detail, photographing my property, and keeping meticulous records, but it felt futile. Karen's influence ran deep. Even if I could prove I hadn't violated the rules, the intimidation had already taken its toll. Friends began warning me, "Don't confront her. It's not worth it." But the problem was, ignoring it only made her bolder. The real breaking point came one evening when I returned from a ride. I had parked my Harley carefully in the garage, hoping for a quiet night, when I noticed something strange. The garage door had been left slightly open. Panic shot through me. I rushed inside only to find the bike gone. My heart pounded in my chest. Whoever had taken it had done so with precision. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry. It was as if someone had known exactly when to strike. I felt rage, helplessness, and fear all at once. My sanctuary had been violated. My prized possession, the symbol of years of hard work, was gone. The neighborhood buzzed instantly. Whispers spread like wildfire, and eyes turned toward Karen's house. It was no secret that her son had been acting out, always hanging around the street, always challenging the boundaries. I didn't know what to think at first, but then came the rumors, half-formed stories about the stolen bike, his reckless behavior, and the inevitable crash that followed. My chest tightened as I realized what had happened. The son's daring stunt on my Harley had ended tragically, leaving him critically injured, and the community was now caught in the aftermath of something far bigger than petty fines or clipped hedges. Yet even in tragedy, the conflict escalated. Karen's rage didn't subside. It redirected. She didn't mourn her son in quiet grief. Instead, she began pointing fingers, framing the accident as my responsibility. If you hadn't had that bike out there, she fumed and whispered, conversations that reached me through neighbors, this wouldn't have happened. Suddenly, I was no longer just a victim of petty HOA harassment. I was being cast as the villain in a story I didn't ask to be part of. Every neighbor glance, every smile, every casual comment became a potential accusation. The tension was unbearable. So letters returned with new fines, now absurdly claiming negligence or unsafe conditions on my property that supposedly contributed to the incident. Meetings were called, minutes recorded, and I found myself sitting in a room full of people who seemed eager to judge rather than understand. Karen's presence was dominating, her voice unwavering, every word a reminder that the scales of justice in this small community were not balanced. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was no longer about rules or order. It was about control, power, and public humiliation. The tension that had been simmering for weeks erupted into chaos one sweltering afternoon, the kind of heat that seemed to press down on the entire street, making everything sharper, louder, and unbearable. I had just returned from documenting my property. Photographs, notes, measurements, all evidence of compliance, all proof against the endless fines and accusations. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, I sensed that nothing in my routine would remain untouched. The street was crowded in a way it never was before. Neighbors clustered on sidewalks, cell phones raised, whispers buzzing like angry bees. At the center of it all stood Karen, clipboard in hand, eyes blazing, her posture rigid, radiating the certainty of someone who believed absolute control was hers by right. I didn't even have to hear her voice to know the next words would sting. The whispers had prepared me. He's at fault. It's his fault. If he hadn't done this, Karen's son had been hospitalized after the crash, and the entire community had spun the story into a narrative where I, the homeowner, was not a victim of theft and provocation, but a perpetrator responsible for the worst possible outcome. My blood boiled. Years of calm, years of compliance, now being twisted into blame for something that was never mine to control. Karen stepped forward, every movement deliberate, her glare cutting across the street like a knife. This, she said, voice carrying, shaking slightly with emotion, could have been prevented if you hadn't let that bike out. Your negligence endangered lives, and now we're all paying the price. Gasps rose from the crowd. Phones captured every word. I clenched my fists. This was the moment I had feared and anticipated at the same time, the culmination of weeks of harassment, fines, and intimidation. But I wasn't going to let this narrative define me. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of calm I could muster, then began methodically presenting the facts. The Harley had been stolen. Surveillance footage, timestamps, and even eyewitness statements documented the theft. Karen's son had taken it without my knowledge, and the accident, though tragic, was his own reckless choice. The letters, fines, and harassment I had endured for weeks now became evidence, not just against me, but against the arbitrary abuse of power Karen had wielded so ruthlessly. The crowd shifted uneasily. Murmurs of doubt replaced whispers of blame. Karen's confident posture faltered slightly as I laid out my case step by step, each point punctuated by proof, photographs of my property taken days before the supposed violations, emails showing my prompt responses to HOA notices, and finally, the security footage capturing her son riding my Harley without permission. The evidence was irrefutable. I could see the tightening in her jaw, the flicker of uncertainty that no amount of posturing could hide. But she wasn't finished. Karen's attacks became personal, venomous, and loud.
You think rules don't don't apply to you?
You flaunt your independence and expect no consequences? She spat, voice rising. You think you can ride that bike anywhere and do whatever you want, putting everyone at risk? The crowd shuddered. Some nodded, some fidgeted, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air, electric and dangerous. And then came the turning point. I stepped closer, voice calm but resolute, projecting over the gathering. You have spent weeks trying to control a street that isn't yours. You've weaponized rules, invaded my privacy, and blame me for your son's choices. But the truth doesn't lie in whispers or intimidation. It lies in evidence. And here it is. Your vendetta ends today. I pulled out the printouts of the surveillance footage, the time-stamped photos, and even the correspondence with the HOA board proving my compliance. The neighborhood held its breath as I laid them on the hood of my truck. I could see her mouth open, eyes darting, searching desperately for a counterattack, but there was none. Not a single shred of proof supported her claims. Then came the final blow. Not mine, but the law's. I had already contacted a local attorney in preparation for this inevitable confrontation, and he arrived just as the verbal confrontation reached its peak. The presence of legal authority was like pouring ice water over a blazing fire. He presented the HOA's governing documents, pointing out clauses that Karen had blatantly ignored while enforcing arbitrary fines.
He explained that her actions were not just unfair, they were potentially illegal.
The whispers of doubt grew louder, now tinged with outrage. Karen's stance wavered visibly. Her usual sharp, confident gestures slowed, and a flicker of desperation crossed her face. For the first time, I saw her human, frustrated, cornered, and angry, but powerless against the evidence arrayed before the community she had tried to control. The tension had shifted completely. I was no longer defending myself. I was exposing injustice. I could feel the collective exhale of neighbors who had been quietly watching, finally seeing the truth. But even in that moment of vindication, the drama wasn't over. Karen lashed out one final time, shouting, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you pay for this humiliation." The words hung in the air, but they no longer carried weight. Her threats sounded hollow, empty in the face of transparency and accountability. Some neighbors shook their heads. Others muttered warnings about escalating further, but the damage to her credibility had been done. I took a moment, looking at the crowd, at the neighborhood that had once felt like a battlefield, and felt a surge of triumph tempered by lingering disbelief. This wasn't about winning or losing in the traditional sense. It was about reclaiming control over my life, my home, and my peace of mind. Every letter, every fine, every whisper of judgment had led to this moment of public vindication. And the lesson, unspoken but clear, was simple. Evidence, calm, and persistence could dismantle even the most oppressive displays of power. The neighborhood slowly began to breathe again, though the air was still heavy with the echoes of what had unfolded. Days passed, and the tension that had gripped Willow Creek for weeks began to dissipate, but not entirely. Some neighbors avoided eye contact, unsure where their loyalties should lie. Others whispered cautiously, recounting the events with astonishment, as if the drama had belonged to someone else, a spectacle observed rather than lived. I, however, had a new perspective. The conflict had changed me, had reshaped my understanding of what it meant to defend your home, your rights, and your peace. In the aftermath, I took moments to simply exist in my own space, appreciating the small, reclaimed pleasures that had once been disrupted. A quiet morning coffee on the porch, the hum of the Harley engine during weekend rides, the laughter of children echoing down the street. Each ordinary moment felt sharper, more vivid, now colored by the hard-won knowledge that peace is not given. It is defended, protected, and nurtured. The home, the neighborhood, and even the very air around me carried the imprint of conflict, but also the unmistakable signature of resolution. And yet the story left lingering questions, the kind that spark reflection and debate. How many other streets held invisible tensions, quiet struggles, and unchecked abuses of power? How often did fear, reputation, or ego manipulate ordinary people into compliance? And how many times had ordinary homeowners silently endured harassment, fines, and intimidation without the courage or means to confront it? These questions hovered, unanswered, but vital, reminding anyone who listened that vigilance and preparedness were not just personal tools, they were necessary for the health of an entire community. Ultimately, the ordeal at Willow Creek became more than just a dispute over property, fines, or a stolen bike. It became a story about resilience, accountability, and the importance of standing firm in the face of manipulation. The neighborhood had witnessed the consequences of unchecked power, the costs of vengeance, and the restorative force of truth. It was a cautionary tale wrapped in real-life stakes, a reminder that fairness and justice could prevail even when confronted by seemingly insurmountable obstacles.